Breaking the Gray. Welcome to Breaking the Gray, a podcast network that sheds light on and breaks open the gray areas between our divided worlds.
Our goal when we created this was that our audience could learn something new, that they could apply to their life today. We unfurled new, unheard perspectives on some of the world's most radical trends, new thinking, and amazing innovations. And Paul, I'm going to guarantee one thing, is that our audience's minds are going to be blown wide open.
Well, Russ, that makes us the audio activists for new voices and real conversations with experts on a whole bunch of areas like health, culture, science, politics, entertainment, and beliefs that you, Russ, and our audience cannot imagine.
And you know what that means, Paul?
What?
To be influencing our audience's perspective and how, you know what, they might even live a little longer as well.
Damn.
I'm Russ Eisenman.
And I'm Paul Wood. And this is our podcast series, Rebel Scientist, where we will talk to scientist and biohacker Sarah Turner.
Sarah's the best.
She is. We love Sarah.
We do. We do. And we learned so much about our bodies from Sarah. So will you. The Rebel Scientist podcast is back. On today's season-ending episode, Sarah's going to talk about spirituality and altered consciousness. What about the spirit? Here we go.
All right, we are back. We are back. Wow, I cannot believe this is the last episode of our season. This is crazy, Sarah.
Yes, hey, Russ. Yeah, it's been a bit of a trip, hasn't it?
Yeah, I'm appreciative. I'm living my life in a completely different way. Thank you very much for enlightening me and our listeners.
Always a pleasure, Russ.
I am excited today because we're getting close to gonging the bell or gonging the gong and ringing the bell into the new year of 2021. 2020 has been quite the year, and I think it's appropriate that today's our final episode of our season as we kind of close out 2020 and move into 2021. And I'm excited to talk about what we're naming this episode around consciousness. There's so much here, and I think we should just get into it and let you give us your theories, your thoughts, your ideas around consciousness.
Yeah, we've been a bit granular throughout the series, so I think it's time we kind of pan out a bit and kind of talk a bit more about potentially the bigger picture.
Yeah, we've been working our way up the body, it feels like.
Yes.
And I think now being outside of the body into this consciousness state, like what is consciousness, from a science perspective?
Well, I think we're on fairly safe ground here, Russ, because actually nobody really knows what consciousness is. So I think we can kind of have the rebel science take on it because why not? Everybody else has a go. Yeah. But of course, science does have potential theories for what it could be. And those theories depend on what kind of mindset you're going with, whether you're kind of going with science and materialism and having consciousness maybe as some kind of property that's evolved along with maybe humans, as part of learning and communication. So it's kind of an evolving property that doesn't really have a bigger role.
It's interesting. We spend a lot of time talking about all the things that we do understand about the body, which is still a very small percentage of what we understand about the body. But consciousness seems to be owned by different people. It seems to be owned by the religious sect or Buddhism. But like who owns? Who is the trusted source for consciousness and understanding around it?
Well, I think the scientists are trying to catch up. But of course, people who are into spirituality and religion have been at this for a long time. And so, there are some fairly well-developed theories. And again, it's something that's outside of science in a way, because it's so far, it's not measurable, and perhaps It never will be. And so yes, of course, spirituality has got long, fascinating history, and science is just trying to get in on the act a little bit more with consciousness science. And certainly a lot of the events I attend, like the Science of Consciousness event in Tucson, Arizona, which is awesome. You have a lot of scientists there who are trying to maybe locate a site of consciousness in the body, or not only in the body, but in material objects, for example.
Yeah.
Like, where is consciousness?
Yeah, and at the basic elements, down to kind of the core of consciousness, it's simply awareness, correct? I mean, how would you say, like, if you were to kind of define consciousness into a few words?
Well, again, it is a little bit of semantics, because obviously you can say somebody's conscious and they're unconscious when you're meaning that is an actual medical term. And also, in a kind of very California hippie parlance, if you're conscious, you're maybe more evolved, you're maybe more spiritual, all of those kinds of things. But again, this is just words. What we're talking about here with consciousness is maybe something bigger than that. Maybe there's some kind of fundamental aspect of reality that is intelligence, awareness, some kind of force, if you like.
Yeah, this is great. This is going to be fun. As we were, my daughter was here, and we were staring at our cat this morning, and she said, it's pretty shocking that a cat doesn't know that it's a cat. And a cat doesn't know that it's aware. And I said, where does consciousness start and end? And are animals conscious? I mean, are those all? It's a fascinating thought.
Well, it is a fascinating thought, and like I said, some of the more frontier science fields now are starting to look at consciousness as something that pervades everything. It's not something that's solely a human concept. And perhaps cats are consciousness that they are cats. We just don't know that, So consciousness as a fundamental aspect of reality is a very interesting concept, because that allows you to look at things in a different way. And like I say, certainly from a science point of view, a lot of the more frontier thinkers are starting to think along those lines, that everything has some kind of consciousness, a proto-consciousness, if you like, some kind of intelligence or life force. And really the consciousness that we know and we have is because we have different hardware, like our brain is equipped with different hardware that we are able to process consciousness on a certain level. But perhaps it's something that's shared by everything, carrots, stones, cats, humans. It's just we're processing it differently through the hardware that we have, which is our brains.
Do you think that are humans the only truly conscious beings?
Personally, I do go with this concept that everything has some kind of consciousness. Mm-hmm. That's kind of where I'm at when I try and think about all of these things. So I think actually consciousness is a part of everything. We are just experiencing one part of consciousness.
Right.
There is a bigger picture, and to think that we're the only creatures that are conscious, to me, seems very unlikely. But it's a typical human response, because humans are very human-centric. You think that you're the center of the universe because that's how humans function. But no, personally, I don't think that's the case. I think that we're all experiencing some part of a bigger whole.
Right. And to that, then we all are connected. So if we're all connected conscious beings, that brings something interesting to play then, I guess.
It brings all kinds of interesting things up, because if we're all experiencing a similar consciousness, then it's very difficult to know where we start and end, and how much responsibility we have, and how much can we influence a kind of collective consciousness that we may have. And also, like you say, with animals, if animals do have a consciousness, or even plants, it also has huge implications for our responsibility to treat animals and plants, all kinds of nature in a certain way. And this is not new. This is like panpsychism, which is almost like here I am in England with the Druids were on to this a long time ago. It's everything is part of one consciousness. And so that has very interesting ramifications when you think it through.
Yeah. Are there I want to, let's stick with collective consciousness, but just a quick side question. Mm-hmm. Are there things or elements in this world that make you more conscious?
That make you more conscious? Well, again, that is a it's a way of looking at things that you have these hierarchies of consciousness, which is possibly just a human construct, because that's, so to be more, I am considerably more conscious than you because I do X. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, certain spiritual traditions hold with that, don't they?
Yeah.
You can have that. So it really depends on where you're coming from and what your belief system is around it. I personally think there is one consciousness and we're channeling exactly the same. So to say there's hierarchies to me doesn't make sense, because I think it's really just one thing.
Yeah, you really can't be any more aware than you are when you are aware.
Well, awareness can be different, because awareness, when you think about psychology, you can have different levels of awareness. You can have people who are walking around in a very unaware state, in that they're not aware of their emotions, they're not aware of their responses, they're not aware that they have choices or the impact they're having. So I think awareness is a slightly different term, and I think that's something that a lot of people can aim towards, having a greater awareness, for sure. But whether that gives you a greater consciousness or spirituality, that's where I think, again, we just don't quite have the language for it, perhaps.
Yeah, there's the, there are lots of things that religions have put out there to make you more religious and more conscious. And I go back to collective consciousness and being part of a collective that's experiencing something at the same time together, is maybe that's a different level of consciousness.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting concept, this concept of collective consciousness, because that implies that there is something bigger than us that we can potentially all tap into. And I think when you look at people who've written about collective consciousness, I mean, thinking about Jung, for example, who most famously wrote about it in terms to psychology, we have this collective consciousness where we could maybe store information that we somehow could have access to. So, for example, he talks about archetypes. There are certain archetypes that we all recognize. We don't need to be taught it because it's there in the collective consciousness. It's almost like the collective consciousness is like an external memory bank where certainly all humans, but potentially all creatures, can maybe have access to. And that explains some very interesting maybe out of the realms of science phenomena, things like channeling and people who are psychic and, all of those things where you need to have, okay, maybe there is some repository of information that's held within some kind of collective consciousness.
Interesting. Yeah. And you have some experience with biophotons in consciousness.
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience researching some of these things, are trying to do it on a more scientific level. But of course, as I've said, this is a difficult subject, because at the moment we really are at the limitations of what we can measure. But for example, biophotons, which is as light, bio as in biology, and then photons as in light. I did go to a laboratory of a very famous scientist called Fritz Albert Popp in Germany, and he was doing some very interesting experiments looking at humans and how they emit light. And not just humans, actually, he started off with cucumber seedlings, looking at plants and how they emit light. But not only that, how that light is then used to communicate with other organisms. And work has gone on from there to suggest that maybe this is part of that collective consciousness. This may be how we are sharing this information. So that's another reason why I'm particularly interested in this field of consciousness, because it relates to potentially light, and what is light? Is that part of this information field that surrounds us and includes us?
Wow, I'm smelling that to be an entire episode here. That is incredibly fascinating. When we talk of kind of alternative ways here, so you mentioned channeling and channeling and some of the alternative ways of doing science. I'd love. I mean, what are those thoughts? I mean, I've heard of, ayahuasca, people microdosing. I have other, there's a lot in here. So let's talk about some of the alternative ways of kind of doing science.
Yeah, well, if you have this kind of concept that there is something else that we can all tap into, then that allows you to look at things in a different way, and things like, okay, maybe we can channel this information. Like, you have people who are either channeling other beings from another even another species or another galaxy. You have people who do that, and maybe that can be explained more with human psychology, or maybe there is something there. I was involved in doing some research using random event generators, which is basically machines that throw up random numbers. And because it's a machine doing it, the numbers are random. So they're programmed to be random. But then how could you maybe influence that by focusing your intention on the machine to do something different?
Yeah.
And they did this main research actually at Princeton University, and they did find that you could skew randomness in some way by just trying to make it that way by your own thoughts. Now, whether that's because you're tapping into some collective consciousness, maybe that's some other mechanism, or maybe that's just humans and how they're reporting science. You have this bias. But I think when you start to look at consciousness or even group consciousness, you're opening up the doors for these different ways of doing science.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. I think maybe the AI will not win in that world.
Yeah. Well, maybe the AI will get its own consciousness. You see, that's another fascinating thing, that because I was in Silicon Valley, I used to go to a consciousness hacking group. Now that was a very interesting group, and they had a lot of speakers there talking about AI, because machine consciousness, now that's the next thing that we're all looking at, because it's something that could soon be a reality.
Yeah.
And is that consciousness the same consciousness we're all tapping into? Is that something else? How we're going to adapt to that? I mean, to be honest, I think Google probably already part there with making some kind of algorithm that maybe has its own intelligence. So obviously scientists in the future are going to have to work out, is it tapping into this collective consciousness? Is it something different? Yeah, that's very much frontier science.
I think we both know a huge Kubrick fan who would love to join us on this podcast to talk about 2001 and how.
Yes, of course.
And the impact of that. I absolutely agree with you that there is a place on the Google campus, or maybe off campus, that's actually studying this and that's actually figured this out as well. This part is we're kind of getting into this realm here of, and I'd like to maybe talk a little bit about things like microdosing, or kind of auras and kind of theories of altered states. I think those are all incredible things that people are doing, but why are they doing it? Like, why are people microdosing? What does microdosing provide for them that they can't get today?
Well, we have, if we kind of, for now, just for argument's sake, accept this idea that we have a collective consciousness, or there is something bigger than us, how do you tap into that? And it seems that because we are in these kind of flesh suits that we walk around day to day, and we feel very individual, and that's probably for a survival mechanism. However, there are people who can, maybe by meditation or trances or however, access these states where they can see the higher consciousness, or maybe they can tap into something. And so I think, because historically a lot of shamans and things have used hallucinogens, things like that. I mean, look at all of the shamans in the deserts that have used peyote, or, like you say, ayahuasca, all of these things. And maybe because we do make these substances, particularly we do make them in the pineal gland, which has been historically known as the third eye, maybe that's a way that we can channel some of this innate knowledge that we have access to. There's so many different fields that have a very similar principle, like akashic fields, where you have this field where you can access information, or even like God or prana or chi. There's so many different people who are saying very similar things. It's just the words are different, that you've got to think there's something there. So people seem to need a pathway to get there. Maybe some people can just see it. Maybe some people need meditation. Some people need drugs. Because I'm, as you know, a light fanatic.
Yeah.
You can get into these meditative trance states by just flashing lights in front of the eyes. I mean, they have machines that do it now, but back in the 60s and 70s, when they were making all that fab art, they had the dream machine that kind of shone light into your eyes, and you'd have inspiration that maybe you're getting from another place of consciousness, So all of these things, I think, are just ways for humans to get to that higher level so they can access what's in the field.
Do you think you've ever been to the higher level?
Well, I certainly have had flashes of it. I don't think I'm one of these people that has attained any kind of proficiency in it. I haven't, but I have had flashes. You know, I've done a lot of Kung Fu training, as we've spoke about before. And in Taoism, they do some crazy stuff that I was involved in training, you know, like astral projection, where you, through a series of exercises and then meditations, you can kind of imagine yourself in a different place. You know, whether or not that was a flash of a higher state of consciousness or a cosmic field, I don't know, but it certainly felt like that.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, perhaps it's there. It's always there, right? And that's what's fascinating about it, is that it's in front of our faces every single day, and it's as simple as staring at a flower and saying, how does a flower come to be? Where did this flower come from? And to appreciate and to really just stop for a moment and just appreciate what's around you. And I think there's this amazing moment where you could and you can be devoid of what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future, and all of the tension and stress that you deal with every day, and just be there for a second and for a moment. And I think it is in flashes, because I'll go all the way back to your blue light toxicity. There isn't enough in this world to avoid the blue light toxicity that it potentially does interfere so much that you can't get to a moment where you can get some clarity to get to a conscious state.
Yes, but I mean, and to do a meditation, that all is part of it too. Everything is part of it. Everything is part of you. You know, like you're looking at that flower, but that is part of you. Even the blue light toxicity, you know, even the light coming off potentially is part of you. Like everything is part of one big whole, ultimately. Yeah. Now that's a really hard place to stay in, that place, you know.
Well,
some people have gone there on a trip and never come back, because it's, you know, it's mind blowing, literally. But to just get flashes of that and to maybe take that in, like I say, right now we're in this crazy COVID time, and it's very easy to get sucked into the whole drama of this small little tiny thing that's happening, and especially if you think that you're an individual and it's happening to you. Mm-hmm. But can you kind of meditate on the fact that maybe everything is part of us, including the viruses and the bugs and everything else? You know, that's I think most people would say that's kind of a more conscious, evolved way of thinking about things. If there was a hierarchy, you know, that's a difficult place to get to, but I think it's helpful.
It is. And I've had moments. I've had a moment for about 2 or 3 months where I've never experienced anything like it, and I remember saying, I can't believe I lost it, but that in itself is it, right? Like the fact that you are conscious and aware, and that this consciousness, this higher level of being able to experience something, it's unexplainable. Yes. And to how you get there is through meditation and shutting everything else off so that you can turn yourself on. But there's so much in terms of, you know, your elegance, Sarah, of your ability to share with us, I think, what we need to do to apply a lot of what we talked about this season to get to this place of consciousness. I think it's a great way to end our season, because we've gone through every part of the body and in the environment around us to a full circle place of, we are all one. We are all connected. That flower is us, right? And so,
and even me telling you, like waffling on to you for half an hour once a week, that's me. That's you just telling yourself, right?
Dang it. It's okay. But there's something fascinating about taking responsibility for your own health. And by doing that, you've taken the question out, and you've answered it for yourself, I guess.
Yes, and I think, if, like you say, we've gone through quite a few things in this season where we've talked about things from a very granular level, and now we've kind of gone right up to the top. But it is about taking responsibility, and it's about taking responsibility for yourself and your body, and we kind of went through that. But now almost what we're saying is you're also taking responsibility for almost everything else just by looking after yourself, because if we are part of one whole, then you looking after yourself, you're kind of looking after everybody, because, you are part of that field. So again, It comes down to that, how can you best serve yourself and serve everybody else by taking responsibility and taking care of yourself? Because if I am you and you are me, if I look after myself, I'm looking after you too, So that's, I think we just keep coming back to that, don't we? Whenever we have these chats, it's about, okay, what can you do? You don't have to change the world. You just have to start with yourself.
It is an interesting part, because there's this idea that the environment that you create and the light that you shine externally impacts those around you, right? Like, I know that my wife and I both sort of start to pick up our exercise regimen at the same time. We pick up our diet regimens at the same time, and we are so connected in that way. We would never admit it, but we are. And then you think at the larger scale, right? Like, I loved something I learned that is fascinating is staying local and eating the diet that's local to you and foraging. That's a huge takeaway there.
Yes. I think seeing yourself as part of nature, where however you see that, whether you see that on a smaller scale, or you can kind of get there with these more grandiose ideas we've put out today, but just seeing yourself as part of nature and part of the environment and how you fit into that. And I would say, we skirted a little bit around spirituality and religion, but I would say my kind of religion here is a bit like nature. Nature is that underlying intelligence. And the closer we can get to kind of living in harmony with that, I think you can't go far wrong. So seeing everything as part of your environment, it's not just the food, it's where the food comes from. It's not just not watching Netflix, it's also watching the people that you're around. Everything is part of your environment. So how can you best fit into that environment? The light, the food, the whole thing.
I felt very godlike during our break in being able to individually turn off people's devices on the Wi-Fi. And it forced everyone to put their phones down. I said, the Wi-Fi's out, to stir each other and have a conversation, and to recognize that we are so checked out from each other, even when we're sitting with each other.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, we are in a society that does seem to favor this individualism, which does seem to me to be going a little bit against those laws. And you're right. The more you can bring that back, potentially the better the connection you can have, for sure.
Is nature having a comeback during COVID?
Well, certainly there are always gains, aren't there? There are always gains where you have these things. I mean, I'm sure there's less traffic on the roads, there's less flights, there's all kinds of things. I mean, I think, what did they see in the Thames? There's all kinds of strange creatures coming back up the Thames because all of a sudden, there's a lot less pollution.
Right.
So yes, I mean, where there's a vacuum, nature always fills it.
That's true. We went on a whale watching tour. We don't do that often because we live by the ocean, but we decided to do it, and it was fascinating. We went down to Monterey, and we saw orcas, we saw otters. It was like they had all come out to celebrate, right? Because there weren't as many ships on the ocean, and I feel like this is its time to reflect. And this is such a powerful podcast because it is a chance to apply a lot of new thinking to yourself as we do kind of crack open the seal of our quarantine doors, and we start to live our lives a little differently, knowing that life is fragile and nature is fragile.
Yes, exactly. And even but embracing the whole part of nature too, because I mean, if we carry on, thinking about consciousness, viruses are part of us. They are part of nature. And I think, if we're trying to fight against something which is part of us, that doesn't make sense at all.
Right.
So of course, reflecting on all of this, it is a great time. And yes, solitude is helpful every now and then. We do live in a very crazy society. So having this kind of enforced reflection time, if you use it well, it can be hugely beneficial.
Yeah, there's something that I'm curious how you would leave this season and kind of get people excited about 2021 and what can we look forward to, and what would be something you'd want to leave the audience with after a season and a year like 2020?
Yes, well, it has been a crazy year. So, but I think, learning things like, okay, how to take a bit of time, maybe how to quantify things that are happening to you so that you can actually make goals and progress. Looking at your environment, like you said, how can we be more local? How can we have more community? How can we nourish those things that are really important? Because I think when you take everything away from people, you take away all their shopping and their pubs and their partying, you start to realize what's really important. So we can definitely take that into the next year. I think in the next season, we're going to get even more rebellious than we have been this season. And we're going to start to talk to, we're going to really take up some radical ideas and viewpoints and see how we can explore those. And certainly from my travels around and meeting all kinds of crazy scientists, I know I've got a lot of people we could maybe bring on the show to maybe give their fairly out there views that people can then see, how can we compare to this, or, what is in there that may be nuggets that would, really change our thinking for the next year. Because I think really this is not a sprint that we're in. This is a marathon that we're in right now with this situation. And so it's time to knuckle down and really start to think a bit differently.
Well, that, every rebellion starts with one rebellious one. I'm gonna apply that to you because I'm hitching my ride to Sarah Turner for a few reasons. One is I think you have shared with us how to think outside the box and how to think a bit differently, to question our sources and to explore, very new thinking and very new things. We talked about trusted sources, and who do we trust in this crazy world of lying and disinformation and Twitter, and who do we believe? But when it comes to science and the Dr. Fauci's of the world and our doctors, and trusting in yourself and what you believe to be right. But Sarah, I think we're putting, our trust in people like you to tell us that, there are alternative ways to be living your life. And there are alternative ways to be, exploring something new and to be, to apply biohacking to your life every day.
Well, I hope so, Russ, and I hope that we can at least shine just a different view so that people can take it for themselves and start to explore something. Because, we talked about awareness, having awareness that there are all these different viewpoints out, that's maybe all you need, because you don't have to take on board what people say. Right. We have our little chats and we say a few controversial things, but you take on board what makes sense for you and the rest you can discard. But I think it will be fun to bring some of these more out there views to people so that people can at least make an informed choice.
That's right. We're going to be citizen biologists.
We are. And we're
going to do this.
Citizen rebel scientists doing a public service.
That's right. I'm a junior rebel scientist in training. I'll always be in training. I feel like a young Jedi. And I so truly appreciate your time, your energy, and your love for all of the listeners to share your world with us.
Likewise, Russ. It's been a pleasure.
Same here. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Rebel Scientist Podcast is a Breaking the Gray production. Created by Russ Eisenman and Paul Wood. Hosted by Sarah Turner. Music and sound editing by Logan Shea. For more information and other fantastic podcasts, visit breakingthegray.com. That's gray with an E. breakingthegray.com. Breaking the Gray.